Hi, everybody. I think maybe we should clear the stage before we get started. While we're moving chairs, this feels like a magic trick all of a sudden. My name is Chris Kawalek, and I do product marketing here at ForgeRock. This is John Kimble, and hello. He is a distinguished customer engineer for ForgeRock, and we're really excited to be here. I actually live here in Austin, and there's so many musicians. John's a DJ. I play guitar and sing, and Mike obviously plays guitar, and Eve Mailer,
thankfully
musician.
You qualify that as a musician.
Yes. And Lhasa, there's so many people in the organization, Daniel Raskin, who play music. So it's really exciting to be up here on this stage facing that direction. That's kind of a new experience for us. So we're super excited to be here. But we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about how to secure these customer interactions, primarily around voice, and how you can use identity to really make voice transactions a lot more secure and have a lot more confidence in them as a user. So what's gone on is that voice control has finally become practical. I imagine a lot of us, we talked about people being different age groups. I think a lot of us of a certain age group probably started using voice recognition or voice control technology with something like drag and dictate. If y'all use that, I certainly did, to do dictating emails and Word documents and that sort of thing. And it was really an amazing thing for its time, but you couldn't really do very much. It was moderately usable. But over time, we got to things like some built-in voice control technologies in macOS and Windows in kind of the early days. And you could do things like change the volume of the computer or turn it off, maybe. But this was kind of interesting, but really not the kind of level of voice control that we see today with things like OK Google and Siri and Cortana. These things really changed the way that we interact with devices, where the keyboard became a lot less necessary. We could actually do real things with our voice. And now there's kind of a new generation, maybe a .5 generation of these voice control technologies, starting with the Alexa and the promise of the upcoming Bixby technology from Samsung. And we really think that these things are going to take off as solutions for the way we're going to start interacting digitally with all the services that we use. We bought an Amazon Echo a while ago, and the thing that was really exciting about it for us is we unpacked the thing, we set it up. This is me and my family. I was cooking dinner, and we asked her, just set some timers. We asked her what time it is. We asked her the weather, and then we looked for one of her new skills to see if we could do something kind of fun. So we got the 20 questions skill, and my daughter decided to try to pick a pretty obscure thing for the Echo to try to guess. So she picked the mineral obsidian. And we sat there for a couple minutes, and the Echo, I keep trying to say, I want to say Echo Dot because I don't want her to wake up.
I think she's
over there. Is she yeah, she's red?
Yes.
Okay. So I can say her name. So it's the personal assistant who shall not be named, Alexa. So we were there. Alexa was asking us all kinds of questions, and after about 5 minutes, she said, is it obsidian? And everybody in the house screamed, including me. We just could not believe that this little $50 box, with the help of a multi-billion-dollar cloud service, had interpreted what we said, asked different questions based on what our responses were, and then guessed what my 15-year-old was thinking. Absolutely unbelievable. So clearly we're getting somewhere. So what's happening now is that voice is just becoming another channel. And with all the other channels that we've experienced adding to our lives, as we start using computers and we started using phones to do things, to interact with things, people just want them to work. They just want that channel to do what they can do on all their other channels. So this ties directly into this idea of an omni-channel experience. So you don't want to be limited by the fact that you're using voice. You want to be able to do all the things that you would do if you weren't using voice. You want to be able to buy tickets to shows. You want to be able to just buy things in general. And to do that, you need to have some level of security and some level of confidence in the transaction. And one of the things that I think people, even novice users, get right away is that you can't really say your password out loud. You can't really spell it. You can't, the Apple TV lets you do that. That's a little bit of a bizarre feature. And even saying it out loud is something that I think most people understand is not such a good idea. So voice is clearly a little bit different than the other ways that we interact with these services. So these services are trying to make it easy for us to spend some money. So let's uncover and unmute our friend here. So here she is, and I'm going to unmute her. So please, nobody yell out, Alexa, anything.
It's my Alexa, by the way.
All right. So we'll try this here. Alexa, order dog food.
The top search result for dog food is Taste of the Wild dog food, bison and venison, dry 30 pound. It's $53.03 total, including tax. Would you like to buy it?
No.
I also found Blue
Alexa,
Buffalo.
stop. Okay. So that's pretty easy, right? That is a very easy experience. But there's a trick here. And the trick is that the Alexa, the Echo Dot, is mapped to a static profile on the server. She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't know who's talking. This is John's Echo Dot. But she doesn't know if it's John talking or me talking or some other person in our household or anyone in the room. So that creates some issues with confidence in the transactions. And this is really great when the risk is low. Ordering dog food, maybe not a big deal. But when the risk is high, for a lot of the things that we do on the other channels in our world, this is not adequate. So just to sum that up, you can do things like order pizza through the Alexa as well. So when you're ordering pizza, this is probably fine. What's the worst thing that happens if you order too much pizza? You get a lot of pizza, right? But if you really want to do real work with your voice, you need to be able to have confidence in the transactions. It's really, really hard to do this kind of thing when you want to do something like transfer money. You need to make sure that that whole experience is secure in every way, right? But it turns out that consumer confidence is actually quite low in these virtual personal assistants, at least in terms of the privacy aspect of things. So more than half the people in this survey said that privacy and identity theft and all those sorts of things were major concerns for them when using these voice-based assistants. And it makes sense. It completely makes sense. It is a valid concern. Another thing that this survey mentioned was that the usage of these devices dropped off over time. So younger demographic, more apt to use it, older demographic, less apt to use it. So what that means is that we have an opportunity right now to instill trust in the generation that's ready to accept this, and maybe even change minds of the demographic that is kind of reticent to accept it right now, by instilling privacy, consent, and security into the entire transaction from start to finish. So we think there are 3 ways to do this. We think that you need to instill, again, identity and trust into the entire transaction from start to finish. You need to make sure that there's an identity-related basis for security for the entire system. You need to provide a consistent omni-channel experience, and you need to provide privacy and consent controls for the user. So let's talk about that for a second, John. One of the things that I know when we were discussing this the other day, you were talking about privacy in particular. You were surprised that people have now kind of gotten the idea that privacy is something they should be concerned about. Is that right?
Right. And I think that it's gone beyond understanding that your data is potentially at risk. It's also about the user experience involved in that. Mm-hmm. So how easy is it for me to perform the services, the actions that I want securely, but at the same time I want a very friendly, friction-free user experience. So the interesting fact is then, when you're interested in the security of your data, you're probably not going to be that interested in how friction-free that is.
Right.
And then the converse is also true. So when you're interested in the security of it, you're not interested in it being friction-free. And it's very easy as a consumer to cross that line and not understand what that means on the back end. So I think the context around those actions is important. So depending on what I'm doing, understanding the context of that interaction is important on the back end to make sure that that particular interaction is friction-free during that certain context, and then when necessary, moving into a very secure transaction seamlessly for the end user.
That's right. So it's that idea of context. You probably hear that a lot if you read our materials. I mean, that's something that we really focus on here at ForgeRock, is providing enough contextual information to be able to make good decisions at every point in the process of a transaction, whether that's authentication or if it's in mid-session and so on. You need to be able to use that context. And that applies to voice channels as well, just as much, maybe even more so, because you don't have a traditional authentication step with a voice channel. You might have a pairing step, but then from that point forward, the device is then paired to your profile, and no further authentication is typically necessary. And that creates some issues, again, with consumer confidence and the ability to be able to use this for more than just a novelty. So let's talk about identity. So we like to say trust begins with identity, and we don't think that there should be any real difference between a digital interaction and an in-person interaction. You know, we use identity to ensure that who we're talking to is who we're supposed to be talking to and that we're sharing the right information. That's just a natural thing that we do. But it's a little bit different in these digital interactions in that we need to ensure that not just the other people we're interacting with, that's hard enough to do, but also the other services, the other devices, and the other things that we interact with all have their identities authenticated and mapped in these really complex relationships that we all have with these things. So I have 10 or 12 devices in my house, but I'm not always the one using them. That becomes a really complex problem when you start trying to figure out who should be authorized to do certain things with all the different devices in your house. This can also apply to industrial IoT scenarios, for example, where you might have people who can view readings of a particular sensor and people who can affect the devices around that sensor that would affect its readings, right? So there's different levels of authorization there. But thinking purely in sort of a consumer way, because the Alexa is primarily a consumer device, we think it's really important to be able to have at least this ability to ensure that any given transaction has an ability to have an authorization associated with it that's independent of mapping the device to the back-end cloud service. It needs to have a separate authorization and potentially authentication. And we're going to talk about that in just a couple minutes on how we do that. Consistent omni-channel experience is very important. So as I mentioned, this is just another channel. And if we want people to really adopt this type of technology, we need to ensure that we don't make some of the same mistakes that we've made as an industry in the past on these additional channels. So we go from brick and mortar stores to websites. The early websites were kind of they weren't that great, but they got better over time. When we started doing phone formatted versions of websites, they were static and kind of not that great either. Then we started getting into dynamic websites that could map to both, and that was way better. And then apps that were dedicated to a particular store, and those were actually quite good. But every time there's a new channel introduced, there's always this period of time where the functionality is a little bit limited. And that's exactly where we are right now with voice-based interaction. We're in the very early days of that. So we need to figure out how to bridge that gap to get from, okay, it's a novelty and Alexa can tell me what time it is or set a timer for cooking, to I want to be able to use Alexa to do things in my life. I know you have one in your house. How's it integrated into your household?
Well, my wife has a fairly low tolerance for technology. So she is usually a great way to beta test technologies. I bring something cool into the house. If it stays there more than a day, then it successfully passed the test. And she likes to bake a lot, so she loves using Alexa for timers. Yeah. My kids, every morning, they are excited to talk to Alexa to ask about the weather. So I think it's there to stay, which actually they cried when I brought this down here for this demo. So I think it's passed the test. And before that, any of the other technology you talked about, the voice control, even Siri, it really wasn't as integrated into our life as Alexa has become at this point. So yeah. I think it's primed to make that next step where you can begin to do real things with it, and they will make that transition successfully. So, yeah.
Excellent. All right. So we think maybe the third thing that you really need to think about in terms of trying to make these transactions better and more usable for people. So we're talking about originally identity and trust, providing consistent omni-channel experience. So every time someone is accessing your service from whatever device they're on, it's a very similar experience for that person. The third thing is really built on these other things, and that's privacy and consent. And there's been a lot of attention on these devices, Google Home, the Hey Siri feature that wakes up when it hears the keyword, Alexa, of course, as well. In terms of is it really listening when it's not supposed to? Is it, when you have the mute button on, is it actually still listening? Is it listening when you haven't said the trigger word? Is it uploading these things to the cloud? Almost all of them do. And how is that data handled? Is it stored on the server? How long is it stored for? And those are all really valid questions that the service providers are going to have to deal with. That's a separate data security issue. But what we're talking about here is that we want to secure the entire experience. We want to be able to ensure that the types of controls that we have when we're using a web browser, when we're using our phone, we can actually do the same sorts of things with our voice. And the way to do that is through all these different ideas that we've been talking about. We think one of the things that's going to make a big difference is the ability to be able to designate high and low risk transactions or high and low risk activities. So you could say, well, buying dog food, even though it was $53, maybe that's a low risk activity. If I end up with 3 or 4 extra things of dog food because my kids ordered it, maybe that's not the end of the world. But if I want to check my bank account balance, or maybe if I want to transfer anything over a few dollars, I would like to be able to have some way to ensure that that kind of thing only happens when I do it. So you have to give the end user the control over that. And that's a little bit like this idea that we're all familiar with of step-up authentication, right? You say, or contextual security, where you say, well, I might need a little more information for this type of transaction than this type of transaction. And previously, that control has been in the hands of the administrators for all of us. But we want to move it into the hands of the users so that they can designate which things are high and low risk. So John, I know you've looked a lot at step-up authentication. What do you think about this idea of moving that into the user's hands to be able to have that kind of control?
I think that it's become sort of ubiquitous. I mean, most people are very comfortable now with two-factor authentication. If you think about it in terms of iTunes, you turn on two-factor. Google, you've got two-factor. I think taking that and marrying it with the concept of the omni-channel experience. I'm very comfortable using my phone to perform actions, using that as my second-factor authenticator, and moving that experience across channels dynamically based on the context that we were talking about is one of the things that's going to be very important for specifically things like voice-activated devices.
That's right. And last, we want to give the end users the direct control. So not just over this high and low transactions, but over all of their data. And this ties into a lot of the privacy material that we like to talk about. It's very important that all of the interactions that a person does, whether it's what they're ordering online or if it's medical information or anything, that they have the direct control over how to share that information, how it's shared, what is shared, for how long, and the ability to revoke that access when it's no longer necessary. That's an extremely key thing. There's regulations like GDPR that have been discussed already today, and these things are going to instill some consumer confidence in the areas where they're in effect. But there's a lot that we can do between now and where those regulations say we should be in order to get the consumers more on board with the ability to do these kinds of things, with their own Alexa or their own Google Home and that sort of thing. So we're actually going to show you right now how you can do some of this ability to share data out selectively. We're going to use an example of a banking application to show you how that works. So, John, let's switch over to the computer here and see what we got on the banking app.
Okay, so we're going to try to take all these things we've been talking about and bring them together into a single experience. So the concept of context, depending on what it is I'm trying to do, depending on where I'm coming from, how I've authenticated, marrying that with the privacy and consent, so how as a user can I manage the relationship between my data and other users. And then we'll also then go to the Alexa and look at how we can introduce not only the concept of interfacing that with the data that we're exposing, but then using context and an omni-channel experience to do step-up authorization. So we'll see that.
Great.
So to begin with, I'm just going to authenticate as a user. We've got our browser on the left-hand side. This is my actual phone here on the right-hand side, so nobody call me, including you.
I should text you right now.
And so I'm going to authenticate as our user. And this is just a simulated banking application. We're going to see some information about the user to begin with. So one of the things that we're going to look at first is the concept of orchestrating authorization based on context. So we've got some very basic capabilities within the application here, but one of the sensitive things we can do within the application is adding payees to our account. So payees obviously are going to be taking money from the account, so this is potentially a high-risk activity in adding a payee to the account. So how can we take that context of what I'm trying to do, in this case adding a payee, and wrap some additional security around that? So on my phone, I've actually got a biometric authenticator loaded on my phone. And we're going to see that based on my actions here on the browser, that we're going to be required to perform some biometric authorization using the phone. Someone's at my front door.
This is where it gets all Star Trek-y and cool.
So to begin with, I'll try to initiate the action. So I'll add Chris as my payee. And you'll see as soon as I try to perform the action, I should get a notification on my phone to perform the biometric authorization.
Oh, a little bit of Wi-Fi-ness getting us there.
We'll see.
One of the ideas here is that we want to make sure that when we do these higher risk transactions, and in this case, the idea of adding a payee, you don't want somebody going and doing it themselves potentially, right? Or you don't want your kids maybe adding a payee that you're not aware of. So you'd like to be notified of this situation. So you want to be able to use something like a notification or a text message. In this case, we're going to be using a notification to make you, one, aware that this is happening, and two, give you an opportunity to authorize it, to say, yes, that is okay, I want that to happen. And that's the idea.
I've got notifications turned off, so that's why we didn't see it.
You got what?
I have my notifications turned off for safety reasons.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay, so this is the biometric authenticator. It's actually got my face recognized from a previous authorization. We go through the authorization. Hopefully it confirms my identity, and we'll see on the browser, once I've successfully authorized, the action should complete. And there we go.
So that used a live camera shot from the phone with, I think the colors there are trying to make sure that you're not using like a picture or something, right? To make sure it's a really a live thing that's happening. And he just did that live. It actually, even with this lighting, it ensured that that was him through that biometric process. And this is all, one of the cool things about, I don't want to get pitchy, but one of the cool things about the platform, as you all are aware, is this idea that you can have your own authentication modules and you can plug them in, and it's very pluggable all over the place. I mean, this is that kind of idea where you take something like, I want to use this iProve technology. It's very easy to integrate that into the platform.
And actually, we were able to make a decision on when to use the appropriate authenticator. So based on user preference, based on the frictionless experience, we didn't require them every time they log in to use this biometrics, because that's very onerous. Instead, we chose a very specific action within the application to step up the authorization. So we use that orchestration capability to do that. So the next thing we wanted to look at was the area of sharing and consent. So privacy and consent, as we mentioned, is the ability for the user to actually author authorization policy. So if you think about that traditionally, that fell within the organization. It became very difficult to decide what your business policies should be, and those usually would apply across an organization or across your customer base. So with privacy and consent, what we wanted to do is take that capability using open standards and give that to the user. So if you think about something like Google Docs, which everybody's familiar with, the concept of sharing docs that you've authored out with other users is very similar. We wanted to take that experience and apply it here. In this case, in the banking context, the user has the ability to share their information with particular users. So we're going to choose to share our data with an accountant. And in addition to that, they have the ability to revoke that access or manage that access on an ongoing basis. So if they choose to sever that relationship, they have the control to revoke that capability. So to begin with, we're going to look at how we can share information. So I'm going to enable my sharing, and let me move these guys here. So to begin with, the user has the ability, first of all, to decide whether they're sharing their information or not. So if they implicitly agree to that within the organization, you could share that information automatically, but you also give the user the ability to choose whether they want to share information in the first place. So I've gone ahead and chosen to share my information as this user. And the next thing we're going to do is log in as an accountant for this user. They've established a pre-established relationship with the user, but he doesn't have access to their data yet. So when we go to the accounting application, we'll see that the user, as an accountant, does not have the access required. And we'll see what that looks like in terms of the end user's experience. So I'm going to go to our accounting application we have called Parsley. And this is a unrelated third party. So think of this in terms of maybe an accounting firm, for example, that has no existing pre-existing relationship with the bank. So we're going to go ahead and log in.
This could be a tax service at maybe even a grocery store, right? Something like that.
So based on the user that we've established this relationship with, we're going to go ahead and choose the user. We don't necessarily know where their data is coming from. We don't know how the policy would be authored, whether or not we have access yet. So I'm going to go ahead and try to access this user's data. So once we try to access the data, we can see informational that the user does not currently have the access required for any of the resources the user has chosen to share. So in this case, their personal details, transactional history, and investments. But we've set this up so that by nature of the user trying to access the data, we've actually notified the end user that he has some pending requests to see his data. And he can choose then to go through and approve or deny that particular access. So we can see the accountant in this case has requested access to all of these information. So I'm going to go ahead and approve the request. And the next time the accountant goes to try to access that information, based on the user agreeing to share it, we should now be able to see that information in the accounting application. So we've essentially now exercised that authorization, the access to the user's personal information, which has been authored by the user themselves. So they've chosen to share that information. And then if we also look at what that means in terms of the life cycle of that, I can go ahead and revoke that access at any time as the user. So maybe I've switched accountants. I'm going to go ahead and remove his access. And the next time the accountant comes in, obviously, he no longer has the access required to see their data. So we've taken that power and given it to the end user in terms of managing where and how that data can be accessed.
That's great. And one of the things that is really interesting about this, and the reason that we showed you this as we're leading up to our voice demo, is that this is the mechanism by which we can offer this privacy and consent and this ability to be able to put control in the hands of the end user. So with this idea, you can extend this to every type of thing that you might be doing across all the different channels. So I think the next thing we're going to do is the thing that we kind of buried the lead a little bit. I think now we're going to talk to Alexa for a few minutes. Is that right?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to do something kind of dramatic. I'm going to just close that.
Okay.
Because we're done with that. But we're still going to see it if everything works right? Yeah, so we're still going to see it, but we're not going to touch the keyboard anymore. And we're going to do some banking with Alexa. I'm going to let you drive over there.
You want to transfer money out of my account? Well, first ask the account.
Okay, here we go.
I'll ask.
All right.
Alexa, ask Forge Bank, what's my balance?
Your balance is $36,720.25.
I would like to transfer that amount to me.
So now we're going to look at what the context of a particular transaction will be with Alexa. So we've got a low-risk, potentially low-risk transaction if there's a certain dollar threshold that we're allowed to transfer without additional authorization. So if we try to transfer a low amount, Alexa, ask Forge Bank to transfer $3.
I have transferred $3 exactly.
So being fairly low risk, we allow that transaction to go through. Now if we look at what that means, if we try to transfer a large amount, how can we then take this omni-channel experience and we'll be notified to perform authorization as part of that transaction from the Alexa, which originates from the Alexa but requires additional authorization. Alexa, ask Forge Bank to transfer $300.
Please approve the request to complete the transfer.
All right, let's see here. Alexa, ask Forge Bank to transfer $300.
There we go. So you got a notification, and that was
I
a
have
touch
transferred $300 exactly.
ID. It happened really fast, but you got a touch ID request or notification there that asked you to
That's right.
authorize with the touch ID swipe, I guess. Or
Exactly.
and that is what actually let the transaction go through. So that is how you go about securing customer interaction, specifically with a voice angle around the Alexa. And we want to thank you all for your time today. And we hope you enjoy the rest
Sorry,
of the...
I don't know that.
Oh. See, she pipes up at the most inopportune time. So once again, this is John. I'm Chris. Thank you again so much. We appreciate it. And we will see you around the next couple days. Thank you.